Welcome to another horrifying episode with Waking Nightmare. Let's begin tonight's story. The lockbox code Burke and Sable gave me was 4 digits, taped inside a manila folder with the address and nothing else. No name for the woman who'd lived there. No note about what to expect. Just Monica Banks, deceased, and a punch code for the box bolted beside the front door. The house sat narrow on St. Claude Avenue, 3 stories with cypress shutters gone gray and iron lacework along the balconies, still painted black long after the rest of the block stopped bothering. Even at 10 in the morning, the upper floors threw the street into shadow. I stood on the sidewalk a minute before going in, just looking at the place before I started cataloging what was inside it. The lockbox gave up its key without complaint. Inside, the air was cedar and old paper, the particular smell of a house that has been closed up carefully rather than left to rot. I set my tablet on the hall table, opened Burke and Sable's appraisal software, and started where I always start, with the room closest to the door. The first thing I noticed was the card taped beneath the hall table itself. Small, index-sized, in a careful hand. Mahogany side table, circa 1920, purchased New Orleans, 1890 original owner unknown, refinished 1961. I photographed the table, then the card, then moved to the parlor and found the same thing waiting for me on the underside of a lamp. By the time I'd worked through the parlor, I understood this wasn't going to be a normal job. Every object had one. Furniture, ceramics, a row of framed prints along the stairwell wall, each with its own card taped behind the frame, information nobody would ever see unless they took the picture down and turned it over the way I did. On a shelf near the window sat a single ceramic thimble, plain, worth maybe nothing at auction. And even that had a card. It gave the date she received it and the name of the person who'd given it to her. Like the thimble mattered as much as the table. I've done this 3 years now. First with Sable's junior appraisers shadowing me, and then on my own. And I have never seen documentation like it. Most estates I walk into, if I'm lucky, somebody's left a folder of receipts in a drawer, half of them for things that got sold years before the person died. What I found in that parlor were provenance chains, where a piece was bought, who owned it before that, going back generations in some cases. Every card was written in the same steady hand, like she'd sat down one afternoon and done the whole house at once. But the dates spanned decades. She hadn't. She'd been doing this the whole time, building the record as she lived inside it. It made the morning easy in a way estate work rarely is. Instead of guessing at a piece's history from wear and style alone, I had it handed to me. And more than once I logged something at a higher value than my first look through the door would have told me. Because the card told me exactly what I was looking at and where it had been. I worked through the dining room, then the little office off the back hall, snapping photographs and typing descriptions into the tablet, cross-referencing each card against what my eyes told me until the 2 lined up. No error, no card that didn't match its object, no object without a card waiting somewhere close, taped under a lip or behind a frame, wherever it would stay put and out of sight until somebody like me came looking. By early afternoon, the light through the parlor's shutters had shifted enough that I knew I'd lost the morning to it. The first floor was done. Every chair, every dish, every small forgotten thing accounted for and matched to its record. I closed out the file, gathered my notes, and looked up the stairwell toward the second floor, already expecting more of the same careful hand waiting behind every door, and started up with the tablet under my arm. The study took the corner of the second floor. Bookshelves running floor to ceiling on 2 walls, a writing table set to catch the window light. The shutters were angled just enough that the afternoon came through in bars, laying stripes across the floor that moved a little as the sun dropped. I started where I always start, in the corner farthest from the door, working my way around the room in a slow circuit, pulling books out an inch to check for cards behind them, tipping frames off the wall to look at their backs. Every one of them had a card. A leather-bound set of Audubon prints, a brass letter opener in the desk drawer, even a paperweight shaped like a magnolia blossom. Its card noting where she'd bought it and for how much in francs, converted in her own hand to dollars beside it, like she'd wanted the record to hold up in any currency. Then I got to the chair. It sat against the wall facing the door. Carved walnut frame, arms curling down into a scroll at the ends. The upholstery original as far as I could tell. Faded to a soft rose color that told me nobody had ever had it reupholstered. Late 19th century, French, and worth real money at auction even before you factored in provenance. I photographed it from the front, then from each side, the way I do with anything that might carry weight in the final report. And then I crouched down to find the card. There wasn't one on the seat. I checked beneath the cushion, working my fingers into the gap where the fabric met the frame. Nothing. I ran my hand along the underside of both arms and found only dust and the smooth grain of old wood. I got down on the floor and looked under the chair itself. At each leg in turn, then lifted the whole thing an inch or two to check the back legs where a card might have slipped and lodged against the crossbar. Nothing there either. I set it back down and looked at it for a while, longer than I needed to. Every object in that house had a card. The thimble had a card. This chair, worth more than most of the furniture I'd catalogued that morning combined, had nothing. I typed it into the tablet the way I'd type any other note. Object present, no corresponding index card. Possible oversight. I moved on. 2 rooms later, in the narrow bedroom off the hall, I found a cast-iron doorstop shaped like a pelican sitting against the baseboard, wings folded, paint worn thin at the beak from years of a door swinging against it. I reached for its card without thinking, and there wasn't one. I photographed it and logged it the same way and told myself 2 was still nothing, still just a hand slipping once or twice across 60 years of afternoons spent writing index cards. By late afternoon, I'd worked my way through the rest of the second floor, the hall, the back bedroom, the little bathroom with its clawfoot tub, cataloging as I went, keeping the pace I'd need to finish the house on schedule. And by the time I locked the front door behind me and walked out to the car with the tablet under my arm, the numbers sitting in that separate column I'd started for exactly this purpose had climbed to 7. The chair, the pelican, a brass candlestick on the landing, its twin 2 feet away, carrying a card that told you where she'd bought the pair. A small oil painting of a harbor, unsigned, hung in the back hallway where the light barely reached it. A ceramic pitcher in the bathroom, a wooden letter tray on the bedroom dresser, and a wrought iron hook screwed into the wall beside a door in the back bedroom. The kind of hook you'd hang a coat on, holding nothing, marked with nothing. 7 objects out of, I didn't count the total, but it had to be past 100 by then, with every other one of them accounted for down to the thimble. I drove back toward Esplanade with the windows cracked, the evening coming down gray over the oaks, and told myself it didn't mean anything. Houses like that get handled by more than one person over the years. A card falls behind a bookshelf and stays there. A grandchild moves a chair from one room to another, and the card that belonged to it never makes the trip. I had 100 reasonable explanations, and every one of them sounded fine, until I set it against the fact that nothing else in the house had slipped through, not once, not even the thimble. I ate at the counter of the place on the corner near the hotel, a po' boy's shop that smelled like fry oil and coffee. I found myself thinking about that thimble again without meaning to. The date, the name, the care somebody had put into telling the world where a piece of nothing had come from. Then the chair, sitting there with nothing at all. Back in my room, I set the notebook on the desk under the lamp, opened it to a blank page, and before I let myself sleep, I wrote down all 7, one under the next, from memory. I woke up before the alarm and sat at the little hotel desk with the notebook open to a fresh page. And instead of writing anything, I started drawing. 3 rectangles stacked for the floors, the staircase marked where I remembered it, running along the north wall, doorways as gaps in the lines. It came back easier than I expected. I checked my notes against each mark before I set it down. Front door area, near the base of the stairs. Up to the study, the chair against the far wall. Along the hall to the candlestick on the landing. Into the back hallway for the painting. The bathroom for the picture. The dresser in the back bedroom for the letter tray. And then the hook, screwed into the wall beside a door I'd walked past twice without giving it more than a glance. I sat back and looked at what I'd drawn. It wasn't scattered. I'd wanted it to be scattered. That was the version of this where I finished the house on schedule and drove home Friday with nothing on my mind but the invoice. But laid out on the page, the 7 X marks traced a single line through the building, floor to floor, room to room, each one close enough to the last that you could walk it without doubling back. It didn't read like furniture somebody forgot to tag. It read like directions. I got dressed and drove over. The lockbox code worked the same as the morning before, and the house held the same cool, closed-up quiet. I didn't stop on the first floor. I went straight up, past the study, past the landing, into the back bedroom, and stood in front of the door beside the wrought iron hook. I'd taken it for a closet the day before. Up close, it wasn't. The knob was a small brass fitting, old, and under it sat a keyhole shaped for a key with a barrel and a bit. Not a pin lock, not anything a hardware store still sold. I tried the knob anyway. It turned maybe a 1/4 inch and stopped. Solid, no give in it at all. I tried it again in case I'd caught it wrong. Same 1/4 inch, same stop. I pulled the key ring out of my jacket pocket. 7 keys, each one wearing a paper tag in Jerome's blocky hand. Front door, back gate, cellar. 4 more with no labels. I worked through all 4 in the iron keyhole, one after another, turning each as far as it would go before I moved to the next. None of them sat right in the barrel. None of them turned. I stood there a minute with the ring still in my hand and looked at the hook on the wall beside me. Empty. I took out the tablet and photographed the door, straight on and then close on the keyhole, and wrote the email to Jerome while I was still standing in front of it. A locked room in the back bedroom, not on the walkthrough notes, none of the provided keys fitting, asking whether it belonged in the inventory and whether he wanted me to try to open it. I sent it and went on with the second-floor bathroom, the last room I hadn't finished. And by the time I'd logged the towel bar and the mirror frame, the tablet buzzed with his answer. That room is not part of the auction inventory and is not to be accessed. Please continue with the standard inventory. I read it twice. There was nothing in it about the 7 objects, nothing about a key, nothing that so much as acknowledged I'd described a locked door with an iron keyhole in a house full of modern hardware everywhere else. Just the instruction, flat and closed. I photographed the email and set the tablet down on the dresser next to the letter tray, with its blank space where a card should have been. Jerome signed my checks. I went downstairs to start the library, and the whole way down, I kept turning the shape of it over. 7 objects, no cards, arranged into a route that only made sense if somebody had built it to be walked. Ending at a door somebody had gone out of their way to lock, and I'd just been told, without a word of why, to leave alone. I opened the library door and started on the first shelf, camera up, cross-referencing the first spine against the card taped behind it. And the locked room sat 2 floors above me the whole time I worked. And the key ring with no key that fit stayed right where I'd put it, in my jacket pocket. The library took most of an hour before I saw it. I was cross-referencing a set of leather-bound ledgers against the card taped inside the front cover of the top one. And the numbers written on it were faint, penciled small in the upper left corner where the tape met the leather. I'd noticed marks like it before, on the first floor, and filed it under Monica's own shorthand, private and useless to anyone but her. I hadn't thought about it since. I pulled the card free and looked at it straight on. The number was 11. Underneath, in her handwriting, the provenance note started with the word waiting. I set it down and went to the next shelf, to a small brass letter opener with a card behind it. Another number, smaller still, almost lost in the grain of the paper. 6. The note started with has. That wasn't a code. That was a sentence being built one word at a time. I stopped cataloging. I got my notebook out and started writing the numbers down as I found them, pulling cards loose from wherever they were taped, checking the corner, setting them face up on the library table if they had a number and putting them back if they didn't. Most didn't, but enough did that. I stopped believing it was coincidence somewhere around the 4th one, when I had 4, 6, 11, and 2, and none of them followed each other, and none of them matched any inventory system I'd used or heard of in 3 years of this work. I went through the library first, every shelf, every drawer. Then I went back through the parlor, the dining room, the kitchen, pulling cards I'd already photographed and checking corners I hadn't thought to look at the first time. Then upstairs, the study, the hall, the back bedroom, the bathroom. Moving faster than I should have, tearing tape a little in my hurry and stopping myself to be careful. I didn't want to break it before I understood it. By the time the light in the windows had gone thin and orange, I had 34 cards laid out on the library table, and I had gone through both floors twice to be sure I hadn't missed one hiding behind a lamp base or under a stack of table linens. I put them in order, 1 through 34, in a line down the length of the table, and I read the first word of each provenance note across the whole row, out loud, low, to hear it the way it was meant to be heard. The room behind the bedroom was not mine to give away. What is inside has been waiting longer than I have. If you follow the unmarked things to the door, you already know you are meant to open it. The key is in the chair. I read it again to be sure I hadn't rearranged it wrong. I hadn't. It came out the same both times, complete, grammatical, no gaps where a card might be missing. I sat down at the table with the 34 cards in front of me and didn't move for a while. 34 objects, spread through every room in a 3-story house, each one holding one word of a sentence that only worked if you found all 34 and put them in the right order. That wasn't something a woman did in an afternoon. That was something built over years, added to a little at a time, maintained the way she maintained everything else in that house. And it was built for someone. For whoever was going to notice the pencil marks and take them seriously enough to pull 34 cards out of their tape one at a time. She had known someone would look. She just hadn't known it would be me, specifically. Except that she had, because I was the one sitting there reading it. I photographed the cards in order, all 34, laid out the way I'd found them, and then I opened my notebook and wrote the message out in full, word for word, the way I'd say it if someone asked me what it said. Then I closed the notebook and went back upstairs. The chair was where I'd left it, against the wall facing the study door, Walnut frame, upholstery gone soft and dull with age. I'd already checked it once, the day before. Floor, cushion, arms, legs, nothing. I went over it again anyway. Slower this time. My hand flat under the seat first, feeling for anything that wasn't wood or webbing. Then I pressed my fingers into the gap where the cushion met the frame, working around the whole perimeter. Nothing. Then the legs, one at a time, top to bottom. The rear left leg had something taped to the inside face of it, up near the seat rail where the shadow of the chair's own frame kept it out of sight from any angle you'd naturally look. The tape had gone the color of weak tea, brittle and nearly fused to the grain, and underneath it, small enough to fit in my palm, was an iron key. I photographed it first, taped in place, before I touched it. Then I peeled it free, careful with the old adhesive, and held it up to what was left of the window light. It was old. Old the same way the lock on that door was old. Hand-forged. Nothing about it that belonged to a house with modern deadbolts on every other room. I sat down in the chair with the key in my hand. Jerome had told me, in an email with nothing else in it, not to go near that room. He hadn't mentioned a message. He hadn't mentioned a key, which meant one of two things. Either he didn't know any of this existed, and Monica had built her whole system for somebody who wasn't him, or he did know, and he'd told me to stop anyway. I sat with that for a minute. Neither one made me want to put the key back. I photographed the notebook page with the decoded message transcribed in full, the same way I'd photographed the key still taped to the leg before I took it. 2 records, both time-stamped before I opened anything. If I was going to do this, I wanted it on file that I'd found my way here honestly. 1 card at a time before I ever touched that door. I stood up from the chair, the small iron key in my hand, and walked out of the study toward the back bedroom. The key turned easier than I expected. No grinding, no stiffness. The door swung in on quiet hinges. The room was small, 10 feet by 12, maybe less. No window. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 of the walls, and every shelf held the same thing. Black 3-ring binders, spine after spine, each one labeled with a single year in the same careful hand I'd been reading off index cards for 2 days. I found 1959 on the bottom left. I found this year at the top right. Nothing missing in between. 62 years of binders, unbroken. In the center of the room sat a small writing desk, and on the desk sat one more binder, separate from the rest, labeled with the current year. I opened it there, standing, because I didn't trust myself to sit down yet. Photographs, handwritten notes beside each one, dated, initialed with a purpose. A plumber in January, replacing a pipe under the kitchen sink. An electrician in March. A doctor who'd made 2 house calls, his name written out in full both times. 2 men in June I recognized immediately, because I'd stood next to them. The walkthrough team from Burke and Sable, 3 months back, before any of this was mine. Monica had their names right. She had the time they arrived. She had, for one of them, a note that he'd touched a vase in the front parlor and put it back in the wrong place. The last page was different. It was a photograph taken through the front window, looking out, the angle low like it had been shot from somewhere near the floor. A phone propped on a sill maybe, or a camera left running. I was in it from the chest up, tablet under my arm, standing at the lockbox reading the code off my phone. My first morning. Yesterday morning. Underneath, in her hand, Julian Bryant, Burke and Sable Auction and Estate. And below that, on its own line, like she'd wanted room around it. This one will find the room. The caption gave a date. 3 weeks ago. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misread the year, but there was no year to misread. It was this year, 3 weeks back from where I stood now. And I already knew, Jerome had told me on the phone before I ever drove out here, that Monica Banks had died 3 weeks ago, almost to the day. Which meant she was at that window, or something of hers was, on the day she died, pointed at a front door I hadn't walked through yet, waiting for a man who wasn't scheduled to arrive for another 20 days. She'd written my name down before Burke and Sable had a reason to say it out loud. I set the binder back on the desk more carefully than I needed to. I pulled one down at random from the shelf behind me, just to see if the current year was some kind of exception, a last project, a final burst of something. 1971, same format. A man showing up across 8 months, the notes thickening each time, what he arrived carrying, what he left with, the exact minute by the end. The last entry was a photograph of him going out the back gate at night with a wooden box under one arm. And beneath the photograph, one word, by itself, no punctuation. Removed. I put it back and took down 1985, without letting myself think about why. A woman this time. 6 months of visits, same rising detail, same last photograph of her walking away from the house, same single word underneath. Removed. There was a drawer at the bottom of the desk. I hadn't noticed it until I was already crouching, and I opened it slow, half hoping it was empty. It wasn't. A ledger, cloth-bound, no title on the cover, no year. Inside, in columns, going back to 1961, a name, a date, and beside each one, that same word. 23 of them, running down the page in order, decade after decade. Each entry closed out the same way hers closed out everything. I turned to the last page because I already knew, in the part of my chest that had gone cold about 4 lines into that first binder, that the ledger wouldn't stop where the name stopped. Julian Bryant, a date 4 months back. And beside it, nothing. A blank space, the exact width the word would need, left open like she hadn't finished the sentence. I touched it. I don't know why. The ink smeared under my finger, faint, wet enough to move. It hadn't dried. I stood in the center of the small room, holding the open ledger, my name still wet on the page, the shelves of binders around me running from 1959 to the year I was standing in. I called Jerome from inside the room because I didn't trust myself to walk out first and call him after. The ledger was still open on the desk. I kept my eyes on my own name while it rang. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Julian. I found the room, I said. The one behind the bedroom. He didn't say anything, so I kept going. I told him about the binders, one for every year going back to 1959, unbroken, each one full of photographs of people who'd come through the house, a plumber, an electrician, a doctor, 2 men from our own walkthrough 3 months ago. I told him about the current year binder and the photograph of me through the front window, taken the morning I started, and the line under it in Monica's handwriting. This one will find the room. I told him about the ledger. 23 names, every one of them marked removed. There was a silence on the line long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he said, "Close the binder, lock the room, leave the key inside, come back tomorrow, finish the inventory, and submit your report." A beat. You were not in that room. There are 23 names in that ledger, Jerome. Monica kept records, he said. The records are not always accurate. What does removed mean? He paused again, the same measured pause as before. It refers to people who took things from the house without permission. Monica was very particular about her belongings. I looked at the blank space next to my name. The ink had already stopped smearing, drying into the paper while I stood there arguing with him. But I could still see where my thumb had touched it. "Did she know she was dying?" I said. "When she set this up? The chair, the cards, the numbers, all of it. Did she know? Or did she just get lucky?" The pause this time was longer than the others. "Monica wrote your name in that ledger 4 months before we hired you." I didn't say anything back. There wasn't a version of that sentence I could ask a follow-up to. "Julian, I'm here. Come back tomorrow," he said, and hung up before I could decide whether that was an instruction or a warning. I stood in the middle of the room with the phone still against my ear after the line had already gone dead. The shelves running from 1959 up to a year that hadn't finished yet. 62 spines of black binders and my own face somewhere near the top of the stack. I looked at the ledger one more time. The names above mine, the neat cursive, the single word repeated 23 times, like a tally someone had kept without ever needing to round it up. And then I did what he told me to do. I closed the ledger and put it back in the drawer, squaring it against the edges the way it had been sitting when I found it. I closed the current year binder and set it back on the desk. I looked at the key one more time, turning it once in my fingers, and then I set it down on the desk where it had been resting a minute before. Not on the chair leg, not in my pocket. On the desk, where he'd told me to leave it. I stepped out and pulled the door shut. It clicked the way it had clicked the day before, small and final. The back bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. Dresser, letter tray, the wrought iron hook by the door catching the last of the afternoon light. I walked through it into the hall, and it was only there, with the locked door behind me, that I realized I still had my phone in my hand. I opened the camera roll. The decoded message from my notebook, 34 words assembled out of 34 first words, photographed clean and legible. The key taped yellow to the underside of the chair leg before I'd peeled it free. The ledger page, my name, the date, the blank space beside it. The ink still wet enough in the photograph that you could almost tell, if you looked, that it hadn't set yet. He hadn't told me to keep them. He hadn't told me to delete them either. I looked at that for a second, and then I put the phone away. I pocketed my phone and walked downstairs. The photograph still on it. The locked room behind me, the key on the desk inside. Wednesday, I finished the second floor. Thursday, I finished the first. Neither day gave me anything the first two hadn't already given me. The same index cards in the same careful hand. The same provenance chains running back decades. A set of silver fish forks with a note about the jeweler on Royal Street who'd sold them to her mother in 1952. I photographed every object. I logged every card. I did not go back to the room behind the bedroom, and I did not look at the wrought iron hook longer than it took to confirm, for the third and fourth time, that the door beside it was closed. By Thursday evening, the house had a number attached to it. A total, a report with my name on the last page. I emailed it to Jerome Burke a few minutes before 6 and drove back to the hotel and didn't think about the house again until the auction date came through in my inbox 2 weeks later. A line item in a spreadsheet. Sold, sold, sold. No incident, no note. I sent my resignation the same week the auction closed. One line: I'm resigning from Burke and Sable, effective immediately. I didn't give a reason because he hadn't asked for one when I called him from the hall outside that room, and I didn't think he'd start asking now. He wrote back 4 words: accepted, effective today. Neither of us mentioned the house. Neither of us mentioned the room. It sat between the two sentences, the way the locked door had sat behind me the whole drive home, something neither of us named. I had the photograph of the ledger page on my phone, and from there it migrated to my laptop, and from there into a folder I didn't look at for the better part of a week. When I finally opened it, the 23 names were as legible as they'd been standing in that room. Her handwriting hadn't wavered across 60 years. Each entry dated, each one followed by the same single word in the same hand, as though she'd written all 23 in one sitting instead of one every couple of years for 6 decades. I started with obituaries because obituaries are easy. 15 of the names turned up within a few days, men and women who had died at reasonable ages of reasonable causes, survived by children and grandchildren, services held at funeral homes I could find on a map. Nothing in any of them suggested they'd ever set foot on St. Claude Avenue. I read each one twice anyway, and found only an ordinary life ending in the ordinary way. 2 more surfaced in missing persons databases, filed by family members decades apart, both still open, both with the flat bureaucratic language that means no one expects an answer anymore. A woman last seen leaving her sister's house in 1978. A man reported missing by his employer in 1991. No next of kin listed. Neither case had moved in years. I sat with those 2 longer than I sat with the 15. The 19th name took me into a police filing I found through a records request I hadn't expected to get answered. A welfare check from 1987. Closed. Subject could not be located. No further action recommended. I read that sentence the way I'd read the message assembled out of 34 first words, looking for what it wasn't saying. 4 names gave me nothing. No obituary, no census record, no address, no driver's license, no baptism, no marriage, no death certificate. Nothing in any newspaper archive I could reach. I tried variant spellings. I tried the years around each entry, widening the search a decade in either direction. I found people who shared their names and were, on inspection, clearly someone else. Wrong city, wrong age, wrong everything. The 4 I was looking for did not exist anywhere I could find them, which either meant they had lived quiet, undocumented lives and died the same way, or it meant something else that I didn't have a word for and didn't want to find one for. I keep the folder open longer than I should, some nights, scrolling past the 15 ordinary deaths and the 2 unresolved disappearances and the 1 welfare check closed without an answer, down to the bottom of the list where 4 names sit with nothing under them at all. And then past that, to the line I photographed last, my own name, the date, the blank space where the word should go, the ink smeared just enough in the picture that you can tell, if you know to look, that it hadn't dried yet when the photograph was taken. I don't know what that means. I've turned it over enough times that I can recite both sides of it without needing to think. It could mean she wrote my name and expected exactly what happened. That I would find the room, read what she'd built, take the key from the chair leg, open the door, and walk back out again, finished, the way she designed the whole thing to be finished. Or it could mean the ink hadn't dried because the entry was still active. Because whatever the word beside my name turns out to be hasn't been decided yet. Because I am not one of the 15, or the 2, or the 1, and I am not one of the 4 who left no trace. And she had not yet decided which of those I would become when she wrote it. 23 names, and I can find 19 of them in some paper trail that says they were here and then stopped being here. 4 I can't find at all. And 1, mine, I can't find either, because it hasn't finished being written. I close the laptop. The list is still up when the screen goes dark, 23 names and my own notes filling the margins. And I sit there in the quiet of my apartment with the question I can't answer. The copy shop on Elysian Fields had one working machine and a kid behind the counter who didn't look up from his phone when I came in. I fed the photographs to the machine one at a time, from my own phone, largest size the paper would take. The decoded message first, my handwriting from the notebook, photographed clean under the desk lamp so every letter of it would hold. Then the key, taped yellow to the inside of the chair leg, the tape gone the color of old teeth. Then the ledger page, all 23 names in a column with the same word beside each of them. And at the bottom, my own name, the date, the blank space, and the smear where my thumb had caught the ink. I checked each page as it came out of the tray before I let it drop into the stack. Not for quality. I don't know what I was checking for. Maybe just making sure the pictures had come through as photographs of a real room and not something my mind had built for me in the weeks since. They came through fine. The ledger page was legible enough that you could read every name if you wanted to. And I assumed whoever opened this envelope would want to. I bought a plain envelope from a drugstore 2 doors down, the kind that comes 10 to a pack for $1, and a book of stamps. I stood at the counter and wrote the address from memory, because I'd made myself memorize it weeks ago. A house on a street in Gentilly, the last address on record for a man whose welfare check in 1987 had been closed by the police department without anyone ever locating him. I didn't put a return address in the corner. I didn't put my name anywhere on the outside of that envelope. I didn't write a note to go inside it. No explanation, no apology. Nothing that said who I was or how I'd come to have what I had. Just the pages, in the order I'd printed them, sealed, stamped, done. There's a mailbox on the corner 2 blocks from my building. Blue, the kind with the handle you pull down and the slot that swallows things without a sound. I've walked past it most mornings for 2 years without once thinking about it. It weighed nothing, really. 4 sheets of paper and a stamp. But I held it over the slot with 2 fingers, not ready yet to let go. I let go. It went down without any noise I could hear over the traffic. I bent slightly out of some reflex I didn't examine to watch it land, as if there'd be something to see on the other side of a metal door. I don't know if that address still holds anyone. 1987 was a long time before I existed to care about it. And a welfare check closed without resolution isn't the same as a man waiting by his mailbox 30-some years later for an envelope with no name on it. I don't know if whoever lives there now, if anyone does, will open it, throw it out with the coupons and the water bill, or just stand in their doorway holding 4 pages that don't explain themselves. I don't know if this is what she meant. It could be that the room, the message spelled across 34 objects, the key waiting in the leg of a chair, all of it built across 60 years toward exactly this. Toward someone eventually carrying what she recorded back out into the world she'd recorded it from, closing a loop she started before I was born. Or it could be that she never intended this at all, that I've only done the one thing available to a person who finds 23 names and a smear of wet ink beside his own and cannot simply put the folder down. I don't have a way to ask her which. What I know is smaller than that. I know my name is still in that ledger, in a room I locked with a key I left on the desk exactly where I was told to leave it. 4 months of ink dried by now into whatever it was always going to dry into. The blank space beside it filled with nothing. I turned the corner away from the mailbox and kept walking. The envelope was gone. There was nothing left in my hands to hold, and no way to know what she meant for me.